In my opinion, I think I Can Only Imagine is one of the best Christian films out there. I think it's a generally well-made film with some beautiful moments in a very powerful story that wraps itself up perfectly, leaving no loose ends or any hints that we would ever get a sequel. Well, fast forward 8 years later, and seemingly out of nowhere, we get I Can Only Imagine 2. I actually had heard about this movie a few years ago. I remember I was scrolling on Facebook and I saw an ad about a casting call for this movie, and I didn't think it was real. I genuinely thought it was a scam or one of those fake ads that promotes movies that don't actually exist, but nope, apparently it was real, and now it's here. And I gotta be honest, when I found out that this actually existed, I did not have very high expectations for it. The biggest thing for me was the question, did we even need a sequel to I Can Only Imagine? The first film felt complete. It told Bart Miller's story, it wrapped up the relationship with him and his dad, and it gave us the backstory and emotional payoff for the song. And it ended beautifully. But suddenly, 8 years later, we get a sequel. I was like, is there any story left to tell here? And the 8-year gap did not help. Like, at that point, it's closer to being a legacy sequel than a direct continuation. And the thing with most legacy sequels is that they usually end up feeling unnecessary, or like they're just soulless cash grabs. So I went to this fully expecting to be disappointed, or for it to just be fine at best. And well, after watching it, I am very happy to say that I was wrong. I was very wrong because I actually love this movie. Now, I personally don't think it's better than the first film. I think the first had stronger emotional moments and overall more beautiful scenes, but I have seen some people say they prefer this one over the original. And if you did, I wouldn't blame you, because I still think this is a really great movie. And here's why. A big part of the first film was about forgiveness between a son and his father. This one switches it up a little bit and decides to make it about fatherhood itself. And I thought that those themes were actually very strong, and they were very prevalent in this movie. You have Bart and his son Sam, Bart and his father's memory still lingering in his mind. You have a new character, Tim Timmons, and his wife, who discover that she's pregnant. And even Scott Brickell gets some dialogue and a little moment with his dad. And I think having these themes spread across multiple characters was one of the smartest decisions this movie made. And that's where I think the sequel justifies itself. Now, I just mentioned the new character, Tim Timmons, and I just wanted to talk about him a little more because I actually really loved him, and I genuinely think he was the standout of this movie. In fact, at some points, it felt like he was more of the main character than Bart, and I didn't mind that at all. He brought so much personality to the film. He was funny, he had a lot of charm, and I thought the story he was given was very touching. You've got this guy who's not expecting to be a father, who doesn't feel ready for it yet, and is dealing with his own fears. And it manages to mirror Bart's situation, but in a completely different way. And I think it added much more depth to the film. Like, I'm gonna be completely honest here. Without Tim, I don't think this movie would have worked. I think it would have become the unnecessary cash grab I was expecting it to be. Now let's talk about the performances. Overall, everyone did a great job. Now, it is a fairly low-budget Christian film, so don't expect Oscar-level acting, but it felt natural, especially during the emotional moments. I also liked the lighting and thought it was shot really well. It didn't have that low-budget Christian film look some of these films unfortunately have. And I really appreciate that this film didn't try to be overly preachy. Every time it was used, it felt natural and necessary to progress the story. And that's something that the first one did really well too. It tells a Christian story, but it didn't just shove Christianity down your throat in every other scene. And that's why I think the sequel works. But now let's talk about the stuff I didn't love, because there were a couple of things. One of the biggest issues I had was that at certain points it felt like they were just retreading the first movie, especially with the ending. That was basically just an exact copy of the original's ending. And there were a few other moments where it felt like you were just watching a slightly different variation of the same story instead of something new. And I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to parallel these two stories, the one about Bart and his father, and the one about Bart and his son. But sometimes it just felt too much. And while it still works, I just wish we got something a little more unique. Because the story they had was definitely strong enough to stand on its own, without having to lean on calling back to the original so much. The other thing I wasn't a fan of was actually a pretty big one, and that was Bart's relationship with his son. Now, I understand what they were going for. They wanted to add tension. They wanted to have Bart be scared that he's starting to turn into his father. And I think that is a great idea in concept. But the way they executed it just didn't work for me. In the first film, Bart's dad was so bad he would literally just beat him for no reason. So how do they try to convince us that Bart is starting to become like his father? By having him accidentally say the same things his father once told him as a kid. And by showing us how he has become overly strict and very overprotective of his son out of fear. I just don't think those are really comparable. With Bart's dad, it was literally just straight up abuse. But with Bart, it's just being overprotective and him not trusting his son who has diabetes to monitor his insulin. And the movie literally shows us that Bart is completely valid in all of his strictness. Because multiple times throughout the film, his son is shown to not be good at keeping track of his blood sugar. So when Bart is being strict about it, he's not being abusive, he's just trying to keep his son alive. Yes, he is being overly protective, and maybe not trusting enough. But he's nowhere near being comparable to his father. It just felt like they kind of forced this conflict into the movie just to mirror the first film. And I think the movie would have been stronger if the tension came from something else. Maybe if they had Bart actually show signs that he was becoming like his father. Because the way it's shown, I found myself siding with Bart a lot, which makes it difficult to fully buy into this emotional conflict which the film is basically built on. It's not horrible, it just doesn't feel as organic as the first film's father and son dynamic. Now let's circle back to the big question. Was this a necessary sequel? No. We could have never gotten a sequel, and I would have been totally content with the one film we got. But, am I glad we got one? Yes, I am. For the most part, this movie expands on the themes of the original, instead of just copying it. It explores fear in a different way. It adds new characters that actually matter. And most importantly, it still has those beautiful moments. Maybe not as many as the first film, but there are still moments that hit really well. And I really like that they didn't try to just recreate the exact same emotional beats from the first film, even if they got a little close a few times. I also appreciate that this film didn't try to be bigger just for the sake of being bigger. It stays personal. And that's what made the first one work. And that's why this one works too. It understands that the heart of the story isn't fame, it isn't music, it isn't success, it's family. So overall, I Can Only Imagine 2 may not have been needed, but it absolutely earned its place, and it is a worthy sequel. It has some pretty strong performances and some great themes, and even though it may retread a little too much at times, and the main conflict does feel slightly forced, it still manages to land well. And honestly, I'm just impressed that 8 years later, they managed to make a sequel that didn't ruin the original, because that does happen a lot. So I'm very happy to say that this is a beautiful sequel, and I give it a 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.